Every morning she walked alone with her husky, Balto. No one knew where she went or why the police dogs seemed to follow her like shadows. But when the truth was finally uncovered, the entire town fell silent. Because what she carried wasn't just her father's memory, it was his unfinished mission. Stay with us because this story will break your heart and restore your faith and loyalty. The town of Willow Creek woke slowly each morning, the way small American towns often do, through the sound of coffee brewing, trucks starting, and screen doors creaking open to let in the chill of dawn. But lately there was something else that stirred the sleepy streets at daybreak. A sight that made neighbors pause mid-step, children press their faces to frosted windows, and even the local mailman slow his route. Every morning, at exactly 6:45 a.m., a little girl in a faded denim jacket walked down Elmwood Avenue with a silver-gray husky at her side. Her name was Lila Carter, though few people ever heard her say it. She couldn't have been more than 7, small for her age, with tangled hair the color of chestnuts and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. The husky Balto walked beside her with a proud, almost regal stride, his thick coat shimmering against the pale light. They always took the same route, past the diner, through the park, and straight toward the abandoned K-9 training grounds on the edge of town. The place had been closed for years, ever since the explosion that killed 4 officers from the Willow Creek Police Department's K-9 unit. One of them was Officer Thomas Carter, Lila's father. People talked about that night even now, in hushed voices over cups of diner coffee. "Gas leak, they said," murmured Mr. Turner, the retired mechanic. "But how does a gas leak set off 2 controlled detonations?" Mrs. Green from across the street would just shake her head. "Some things are better left buried." I know no one ever talked about the little girl who lost her father that night, but every morning they saw her, small, silent, and determined, walking the same path to the place that had taken him away. That morning the fog was thick enough to swallow the world whole. Streetlights flickered through it like distant stars, and Lila's footsteps barely made a sound. Balto trotted a few steps ahead, nose lifted, tail swaying. He was no ordinary dog. His movements were too precise, his reactions too sharp. When a truck rumbled by on the next street, he turned instantly, placing himself between Lila and the sound, eyes locked until the danger passed. Then, without a command, he moved back to her side. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. It was one of the few things she ever said. The town had learned not to approach her. The one time someone tried, old Mrs. Henderson offering her a pastry outside the bakery. The husky's low growl had frozen her mid-step. The girl hadn't said a word, just looked up with those quiet, haunted eyes and kept walking. By now, most people had given up trying to understand, but Mara Jensen, a reporter for the local paper, hadn't. She'd first seen Lila 2 weeks earlier while driving to work. Something about the way the girl walked, the steadiness of her steps, stayed with her. The husky wasn't pulling her along. He was following her lead. And when Mara learned the girl's last name, Carter, everything clicked. That morning, she parked her car near the park's entrance, notebook in hand, camera ready. The first rays of light filtered through the fog, and there she was, Lila walking with the same silent grace, Balto's breath misting in the air beside her. Mara zoomed in through her lens and frowned. Balto wasn't just walking, he was scanning, head turning left and right, muscles tense, as though expecting an attack. "Jesus," she muttered under her breath. "He's acting like he's on patrol." When Lila reached the gates of the old training field, she stopped. The chain-link fence was twisted and rusted, but she slipped through a gap with practiced ease. Balto followed, tail brushing the metal as it clanged softly behind them. Mara crept closer, careful not to be seen. Through the fog, she could just make out their shapes, the girl kneeling in the center of the cracked asphalt, her hand resting on the husky's head, whispering something too quiet to hear. Then faintly, Mara caught a sound, a series of short whistles, low and deliberate. 1, 2, pause. 1. Balto moved instantly, running to the far end of the lot, circling the perimeter, then returning to her. She repeated the whistle, and he sat, eyes forward, posture perfect. Mara's heart pounded. Those weren't random gestures. They were commands. Lila Carter, barely 7, was giving professional K-9 commands only trained handlers used. When Mara raised her camera again, she froze. Balto wasn't the only one moving. From the edge of the field, just beyond the fog, a second pair of eyes gleamed back at her. A shape large, low to the ground, moved behind the fence. Then another. 2 silhouettes, 2 dogs, watching. Mara's breath caught. She lowered the camera, blinked, and when she looked again, they were gone. Lila stood brushing dirt from her knees, her face unreadable. She placed something small on the ground, something that glinted faintly in the mist, and turned to leave. When she passed Mara's hiding spot minutes later, the reporter's pulse raced, certain the girl had seen her. But Lila's gaze never lifted. When the field was empty again, Mara stepped out from behind the tree and approached the spot where the girl had been kneeling. Her boots crunched over broken glass and frost as she crouched and picked up the object. It was a police badge, old and scuffed, half covered in dirt. The name barely legible. Officer Thomas Carter, K-9 Unit. The next morning, Mara's story ran on the front page of the Willow Creek Chronicle under the headline, "The Girl and the Husky, Daughter of Fallen Officer, Seen Training Like a Pro." The town reacted with awe and pity. Some called her brave. Others called it tragic. But the article brought something else attention. People began driving by the old field at dawn, hoping to catch a glimpse. The police department even sent a patrol car just to make sure the area was safe. And that's when strange things began to happen. One night, just after midnight, a neighbor reported hearing barking near the training field. Not one dog, several. Deep, synchronized barks, the kind you'd hear during a tactical raid. By the time officers arrived, there was nothing but silence and fog. The next morning, Mara drove by the Carter residence. The front gate was open. Lila wasn't inside. Neither was Balto. Instead, etched into the thin layer of frost on the walkway were 4 sets of paw prints, larger than Balto's, lined perfectly. She followed them to the edge of the road, where they vanished into the woods. When she showed the photos to the police chief, he went pale. "Those prints," he whispered, "they're impossible. Those dogs were declared dead 2 years ago." "Which dog?" Mara asked. He hesitated. "The rest of Carter's K-9 unit." That evening, Willow Creek was restless. The fog rolled in earlier than usual, and streetlights flickered like candles in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a single husky's howl broke the silence, long, mournful, and unrelenting. And though no one could prove it, everyone in town swore they saw the same thing from their windows that night. A little girl walking down the road beneath the flickering lights, her husky at her side, and behind her, 4 shadows following in perfect formation. The morning after the fog rolled through Willow Creek, silence hung over the town like a shroud. Streets once busy with the hum of life now felt abandoned, as though the air itself was holding its breath. The diner lights flickered to life just after sunrise, but even the smell of fresh coffee couldn't wash away the unease that had settled in everyone's chest. At 7:00 a.m., when Lila Carter and her husky Balto were usually seen walking toward the old K-9 field, the road was empty. No pink jacket, no silver fur glinting in the light. Just stillness. By 9:00 a.m., the police were at her doorstep. Mrs. Green, the elderly woman who watched over Lila since her father's death, stood on the porch clutching her robe, her eyes red and trembling. "She didn't come home last night," she said, voice breaking. "Balto came back alone. I thought she was just late, but..." In her shaking hands, she held something wrapped in a kitchen towel. The officer took it gently and unfolded the cloth. Inside lay half of a police badge, the rest of it scorched, the metal blackened and twisted. "Where did you find this?" "In Balto's mouth," Mrs. Green whispered. "He scratched at the door until I opened it. When I looked closer, he was shaking." By noon, the story spread through town like wildfire. The girl who walked her father's dog had gone missing. Search teams fanned out into the forest beyond Elmwood Avenue. Drones hovered above the old K-9 base. The woods were dense, full of old police training trails and collapsed kennels. But no one found a trace. No footprints, no jacket, nothing. And then, on the 3rd night, during a pounding rainstorm that rattled every window in town, something impossible happened. Officer Daniels, patrolling near the industrial bridge at the edge of the forest, slammed on his brakes when his headlights caught movement. At first he thought it was a pack of strays until the figures stepped into view. 4 German shepherds, their fur slick with rain, walked side by side across the bridge, formation tight, eyes locked ahead. They were large, scarred, and eerily disciplined. Rainwater streamed down their coats, but they didn't flinch from the cold or the noise. They moved as one like soldiers returning from war. Daniel's breath caught when he saw the faded letters burned into one of the collars. Bravo. He'd seen that name before, on the memorial wall inside the police department. He jumped out of his cruiser, shouting over the storm. Hey, where? The lead dog stopped and turned its head toward him. For a long, heart-stopping second, its eyes caught the beam of the headlights. Cold, intelligent, deliberate. Then slowly, it moved aside. Behind them, small footsteps splashed in the puddles. Lila Carter stepped into the light. Her jacket was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes, those deep, sorrowful eyes, were steady. In her hand, she clutched Balto's leash. The husky trotted beside her, tail low, panting hard. The 4 shepherds surrounded her like sentinels. Daniels froze. Lila? She didn't answer. She just walked past him, the dogs flanking her in a diamond pattern. Bravo in front, another named Echo to her left, Rex behind, in shadow to her right. All 4 bore identical scars on their flanks, burned marks from the explosion 2 years ago. The storm raged, lightning splitting the sky as she crossed the bridge. Daniels called in backup, his voice shaking. This is Unit 12. You're not going to believe this, but they're back. The Carter dogs, all 4. By the time more officers arrived, Lila and the dogs were gone. The next morning, Mara Jensen, the reporter who'd first written about Lila, arrived at the scene. The air still smelled of rain and mud. She spotted fresh paw prints leading down the bridge into the forest. She followed them, her shoes sinking into the wet ground. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became, until even the birds stopped singing. Then through the trees, she saw the faint outline of the old K9 base. It looked worse than ever. The training towers had collapsed. The kennels lay rusted and twisted, and weeds had swallowed the yard. But from the center of the field came a faint light, a single lantern flickering through the mist. Mara crept closer, camera in hand. Lila was there, kneeling on the cracked concrete. Balto lay beside her, exhausted but alert. The 4 shepherds stood in formation around them, facing outward like bodyguards. Lila was speaking softly, her words barely audible over the wind. They found me, Daddy, just like you said they would. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a dog tag, and pressed it against the ground. Mara zoomed in through her camera lens and gasped. There were 5 tags in total, arranged in a line. Bravo, Echo, Rex, Shadow, Balto. At the far end, a 6th tag gleamed faintly, smaller, older, almost worn to dust. Officer Thomas Carter. Mara lowered the camera, her throat tight. Oh my God, she whispered. A sudden noise made her spin around. A shadow moved behind her, tall, fast, deliberate. Before she could scream, a deep growl froze her in place. Bravo had appeared at her side, teeth bared but eyes calm, warning her to stay back. Then from behind Lila, a voice low, male, trembling echoed across the field. Lila? It was Ethan Rhodes, a retired detective and Thomas Carter's old partner. He'd driven all night from another county after hearing the reports. His flashlight beam cut through the mist, landing on the little girl. She turned, her face pale under the lantern light. They came back, she said softly. They didn't forget. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. He took a step closer, staring at the dogs. He knew those collars. He'd fastened them himself years ago before the explosion. It can't be, he whispered. They were buried. Lila shook her head. No, they were waiting. Ethan crouched beside her, scanning the scars on the dogs' bodies, the burns, the bullet marks. They weren't ghosts. They were survivors. Somehow they had escaped the explosion and spent 2 years finding their way home to her. Where did you find them, Lila? He asked. They found me, she said, stroking Bravo's fur. At night by the tracks. Balto heard them first. And you brought them here? She nodded. This is their home. Dad said they'd always come back to where they belong. The words cut through Ethan like glass. He looked around the field. realizing the magnitude of what he was seeing. These dogs weren't strays. They were trained, loyal, disciplined, still following their last command: protect the Carter family. As the lantern flickered, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint metallic sound. Ethan turned and saw something half buried under the rubble near the training tower, a twisted piece of steel with faded letters. He brushed off the dirt, heart sinking when he read the inscription: Willow Creek Police, K9 Storage Bunker. "Lila," he whispered, voice trembling, "no one ever told you what really happened that night, did they?" She looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "They said it was an accident," she murmured. "A gas leak." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, it wasn't." Before he could continue, a low growl rippled through the air. The dogs stood instantly at attention, heads raised, ears twitching. Something or someone was moving through the trees. The sound of boots crunching against gravel, flashlights, voices, police backup. "Stay behind me," Ethan said quickly, stepping forward. But the dogs didn't wait. They spread out, forming a protective circle around Lila. Their growls deepened. "Easy, boys," Ethan whispered. "They're not here to hurt her." But he wasn't sure of that. The first officer to enter the clearing froze at the sight. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Rhodes, what the hell is going on here?" Ethan raised a hand. "She's not alone anymore. And neither are they." Behind him, Lila stood silently, her small hand resting on Balto's back. The lantern's flame flickered in the wind, casting shadows across the cracked pavement. In that dim light, she looked like a ghost of her father's past, a tiny figure surrounded by the loyal soldiers he'd left behind. The rain began again, soft at first, then harder, until the world blurred into silver. And over the storm, one sound rose above everything else: the unified bark of 5 dogs, deep and powerful, echoing across the field like a vow renewed. It was a sound Willow Creek hadn't heard since the night Officer Thomas Carter died. The storm lasted through the night, hammering Willow Creek until every gutter overflowed and every street shimmered beneath pools of lightning. When dawn came, the rain slowed to a mist, hanging low over the town like a ghost that refused to leave. The K9 training grounds were quiet again, but the silence felt heavier now, thick, watchful. Ethan Rhodes hadn't slept. He'd spent the night at Mrs. Green's house, sitting by the window as Balto lay pressed against Lila's legs. The girl had fallen asleep on the couch, her small hand clutching one of the K9 dog tags as if it were a lifeline. Every so often she stirred, whispering her father's name in her sleep. When the first light of morning broke through the clouds, Ethan stood and poured himself a cup of stale coffee. His reflection in the kitchen window looked older than he remembered, haunted. "You're chasing ghosts again," he muttered to himself. But he couldn't shake what he'd seen last night. The 4 German shepherds standing guard around that child, their eyes gleaming with intelligence and pain. They weren't just strays. They were soldiers without a commander. He turned when he heard soft footsteps behind him. Lila was awake, standing barefoot in the doorway, Balto at her side. She looked small but composed, her hair tangled and her eyes clear. "They're waiting," she said quietly. "Who?" Ethan asked. She glanced toward the window. "The others." He followed her gaze and froze. Outside, beyond the garden fence, 4 dark shapes sat in the fog: Bravo, Echo, Rex, and Shadow. They were motionless, like statues, rainwater dripping from their fur. Watching, waiting. Ethan set down his mug. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see what they're trying to show us." The old K9 base stood like a ruin of memory. Ivy crawled up the concrete walls, the sign half erased by time. Willow Creek Police, K9 Training Division. The air inside smelled of mildew and rust. Every step they took echoed through the hollow halls. Lila walked ahead of Ethan, flashlight in hand, Balto leading the way. The other 4 dogs followed silently, their paws making no sound on the cracked floor. The beam of light danced across peeling posters, rusted cages, and a bulletin board still cluttered with faded photos. Ethan stopped to look. There they were, Thomas Carter and his K9 Unit 5 men, 5 dogs. He recognized every face. Himself among them, younger, smiling beside his partner, Thomas. He reached out and brushed the dust from the photo. God, Tommy, he whispered, you didn't deserve this. Lila lingered at the edge of the room, her flashlight trembling slightly. He used to bring me here, she said. He said the dogs trusted me, that they could smell kindness. Her voice wavered. But after that night, no one came back. Ethan turned to her. You remember the explosion? Just the sound, she said softly. It felt like the sky fell. Then it was quiet, and Balto found me. Balto whined, pressing his head against her leg. Ethan crouched beside her. Your father saved a lot of lives that night, but there's something the department never told you. Lila looked up. What? He hesitated. There was no easy way to say it. Your father found something he wasn't supposed to. Someone was using this facility for illegal operations, testing explosives on K9s, smuggling narcotics through police channels. He tried to report it. That's why they set the fire. Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. They killed him. Ethan nodded slowly. They called it an accident, said he and his team died instantly. But when they found the wreckage, some of the dogs were missing. We thought they'd run off, or worse. But I think they escaped. The flashlight flickered, and Balto suddenly barked, sharp and alert. His ears pricked toward the far wall. The other dogs tensed, moving closer together. What is it, boy? Ethan whispered. Balto padded forward, nose to the ground, until he stopped before a cracked cement wall at the back of the hall. He pawed at the corner, claws scraping the stone. Echo joined him, whining softly. Then the unmistakable sound came, a hollow echo beneath the surface. Lila stepped forward, her heart hammering. There's something behind it. Ethan grabbed an old metal rod and started prying at the seam. The wall gave way with a groan, revealing a narrow wooden door half buried in rubble. Faded letters were painted across it. Authorized personnel only. Lila's flashlight beam quivered as Ethan pulled the door open. A gust of stale, cold air hit them, carrying the scent of disinfectant and dust. A staircase led downward into darkness. Stay behind me, Ethan murmured, taking the lead. The steps creaked beneath their feet as they descended. The air grew colder, the walls narrower, until they reached a heavy steel door with a cracked keypad beside it. Ethan pressed a few buttons at random, but it was Lila who noticed the small paper label taped above the pad, a string of numbers faded by time. Try 1107, she whispered. That's his badge number. Ethan entered the code. The lock clicked and the door swung open. The flashlight beam revealed a sight that stole their breath. The basement was intact, untouched by the explosion. Metal tables lined the walls, each covered in medical supplies, syringes, bandages, bottles of antiseptic. Shelves stacked with dog food and water bowls. At the far end stood a large whiteboard filled with notes, training schedules, medical charts, and sketches of canine anatomy. And in the center of the room, on a small wooden table, was a folded American flag and a photograph of Officer Thomas Carter smiling beside his dogs. Lila walked toward it, her hand trembling. He was trying to build a sanctuary, Ethan said quietly, a place where retired or injured canines could live out their lives. He didn't want them put down after service. Tears welled in Lila's eyes. He said heroes shouldn't be thrown away. She ran her fingers over the photo, her lip quivering. He told me once that bravery isn't about fighting, it's about staying. Balto sat beside her, pressing his head into her lap. The other dogs gathered around, tails low, silent as stone. Ethan noticed something else, a small wooden crate beneath the table, sealed with metal clasps. The lid bore an inscription in her father's handwriting. For Lila, when they find you, follow them home. Ethan unlatched the crate and lifted the lid. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a set of old training journals, and a voice recorder wrapped in plastic. Lila stared as he pressed play. A soft click. Then a man's voice, steady, gentle, unmistakable. Hey, sweetheart, the voice said. If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't come back, but it also means they did. Bravo, Echo, Rex, Shadow. They're yours now. Take care of them like they took care of me. And if Balto's with you, then I know you're safe. Lila's breath hitched. Thomas Carter's voice continued, quieter now. If they ever try to tell you what happened here was an accident, don't believe them. There are men who'd rather bury the truth than face it. But you don't have to fight them. Just protect what's left. The dogs, this place, the promise. That's enough. And remember, baby girl heroes never leave. Sometimes they just wait to be found again. The tape clicked off. Lila's tears fell freely now, silent and unrestrained. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his own throat tight. "You did it, kid," he whispered. "You kept his promise." Balto let out a soft whine as if agreeing. The other dogs lifted their heads, ears twitching, eyes alert. They all seemed to sense something Ethan couldn't see. A weight lifting, a presence fading. And then, from somewhere deep within the basement, a faint sound echoed. A single bark. It wasn't any of theirs. It was distant, ghostly, yet unmistakable. The voice of another shepherd answering from beyond. Lila smiled through her tears. "That's him," she whispered. "He's still here." Ethan stood in silence as the sound faded, replaced by the soft hum of the wind outside. In that dim underground room, surrounded by the legacy of a man who refused to let loyalty die, Lila knelt beside her father's flag and whispered, "I'll take care of them, Daddy, all of them." The dogs lay down around her, their bodies forming a circle, their breathing slow and steady. And for the first time since the explosion 2 years ago, the K9 unit of Willow Creek was home again. The wind over Willow Creek carried the scent of rain and pine the next morning, whispering through the broken windows of the old K9 base like a ghost moving through memory. The storm had passed, but it left behind puddles that mirrored the gray sky and the jagged ruins of a place that had once been full of life and command. Now it was just a graveyard of loyalty and silence, except for the steady breath of the dogs that refused to leave. Lila sat near the doorway, her father's flag folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the field beyond the fence. The 4 shepherds Bravo, Echo, Rex, and Shadow stood watch around the perimeter, unmoving, disciplined, like they were still waiting for their officer's voice. Balto rested beside her, his fur damp but warm beneath her hand. He'd barely slept, none of them had. Ethan Rhodes was pacing, his boots splashing in the shallow puddles that formed near the walls. He'd made calls all morning, calls he didn't want to make. "They're coming," he said finally, his voice hoarse. Lila didn't look up. "Who?" "Animal control. The city. Maybe even federal agents," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Too many people know now. They think you're in danger. They'll want to take the dogs, maybe put them in holding facilities. They won't understand." "They'll take them away," Lila whispered, "like they took Dad." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Ethan froze, guilt shadowing his face. "I won't let that happen," he said. "Not again." But both of them knew he couldn't stop it. Once the government got involved, the law wouldn't bend for a little girl, no matter how loyal her dogs were. A faint rumble echoed down the road, the sound of tires on wet gravel. The shepherds stiffened immediately, ears pricking, muscles tensing. Bravo let out a single, low bark. Lila stood slowly, her small frame trembling but defiant. Through the mist, the white vans appeared marked City Animal Control, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. Officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their movements rehearsed. The man in charge, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, his badge gleaming, walked to the gate. "Miss Carter," he called, "you need to step away from the animals." Lila said nothing. Balto rose to his feet, his tail low, his blue eyes locked on the strangers. Behind him, the 4 K9s fanned out, standing shoulder to shoulder. Their breath steamed in the cold morning air. "Please," the officer continued, his tone softening, "we're not here to hurt anyone. But these dogs are registered as government property. They're not safe for a child." "They're not property," Lila said, her voice trembling but steady. "They're family." Ethan stepped forward, trying to mediate. "You don't understand," he said. "These dogs aren't a threat. They're service animals. They protected her, kept her alive." The officer's expression hardened. "They're trained to follow combat orders, not live in a civilian home. If they perceive danger, they'll attack. It's protocol. I can't risk it." At that, Bravo's deep growl rolled through the yard, low and warning. Echo and Rex mirrored it, tails rigid, eyes locked on the men. The sound was primal, an oath of defense. The younger officer flinched and raised his tranquilizer rifle. "Sir, they're positioning." "Stand down," barked the lead officer. But it was too late. The tension broke like thunder. A sharp hiss, a dart whistling through the air, then chaos. Balto lunged forward, barking fiercely as the dart struck the ground near Lila's feet. The shepherds formed an instant wall around her, snarling, eyes blazing. Lila cried out, "No! Stop!" But her voice was lost in the shouting and barking that filled the air. Ethan moved fast, stepping between the officers and the child. "Lower those weapons," he shouted. "You'll only make it worse." Bravo's gaze shifted to Lila, his muscles twitching, waiting for her cue. Her father's last words echoed in her mind, his voice on the tape, soft and commanding. "When it gets too loud, remember, the dogs only listen to courage, not fear." Lila's throat tightened, but she stood tall. "Bravo," she whispered. The shepherd looked at her, waiting. Her small voice grew stronger. "Heel." Instantly, Bravo stopped. The others froze, every muscle held in disciplined obedience. The officer stared, stunned. She took a step forward, lifting her chin, facing the wall of uniforms. "They won't hurt anyone," she said. "But if you take them, they'll die. They don't belong in cages. They belong here with me. This is their home." The silence that followed was thick, almost reverent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the officers lowered his rifle. "Sir," he said quietly to his superior, "look at them. They're responding to her. She's in command." The lead officer hesitated. His eyes flicked between the girl and the dogs, between the child and the disciplined formation that even his own men couldn't replicate. Finally, he exhaled. "You've got one night," he said. "Tomorrow we'll be back with orders. If you want to say goodbye, do it then." They left as quickly as they came. As the sound of engines faded, Lila sank to her knees, tears spilling down her face. Balto nuzzled her cheek, whining softly. Ethan crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said gently. "Real good." But the reprieve wouldn't last. That night the air grew cold again, and a hard wind swept through the valley. The dogs refused to rest, pacing near the entrance, their instincts on high alert. Lila sat beside Balto by the fireplace Ethan had managed to light in the old office. The flames cast long shadows across the floor. Balto's breathing was uneven, heavier than usual. His coat had dulled, his strength waning after days of sleepless vigilance. Lila stroked his head, whispering, "It's okay, Balto. You can rest. I'll watch now." He blinked up at her with tired, loyal eyes, tail thumping once before he laid his head across her lap. She didn't notice the way his chest rose slower each time. Outside, Bravo lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching. The others followed suit, a sound of vehicle approaching again. Headlights broke through the trees, slicing through the darkness. "They're back early," Ethan muttered, grabbing his flashlight. But when the car door opened, it wasn't animal control. It was Chief Reynolds, her father's old commanding officer. His face was somber beneath the beam of his flashlight. "I got your call, Ethan," he said quietly. "I read the files. Everything Thomas uncovered. You were right. Someone covered it up. He died exposing them." Lila looked up from the floor, eyes glistening. "You knew my dad?" Reynolds nodded. "He was the bravest man I ever served with. He died to protect these dogs and the truth about what was happening here." He looked down at Bravo and the others. "And now I see they protected what mattered most, his daughter." He stepped closer and knelt beside her. "I can make sure they stay with you, Lila. I'll sign the order myself. No one will take them again." But before he could say more, Balto let out a soft, shuddering breath. His body went still in her lap. For a moment the world stopped. The fire crackled softly, and outside, a low, mournful howl rose from Bravo. Echo joined, then Rex, then Shadow, their voices blending into one haunting sound that filled the night. A song of loyalty, of love, of loss. Leela clung to Balto's fur, sobbing quietly. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You brought them home." Ethan stood silently beside her, tears burning in his eyes. Reynolds removed his cap, bowing his head. By morning, Balto was buried behind the training field under the old oak tree, wrapped in her father's flag. The shepherds sat around the grave for hours, silent and unmoving. When the sun rose higher, they rose too, and one by one, they walked toward the forest, disappearing into the mist. Lila didn't call after them. She knew where they were going, back to wherever heroes rest when their duty is done. Weeks later, the base reopened as a rehabilitation center for retired service dogs, funded by the Willow Creek Police Department. On the front gate hung a new sign carved into wood, Balto's Promise, a sanctuary for heroes, and beneath it, in smaller letters, for the ones who kept their word. Every morning, just as she once did with Balto, Lila walked down the road toward the training field. She wore her father's old badge around her neck and the same faded jacket, now too small for her shoulders. As she reached the gates, she'd whistle softly. One short, one long, pause, one more. From the forest came the faint answering echo of 4 barks, distant but clear. She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Heel, boys," she whispered. And through the fog, the shapes of 4 shepherds emerged, walking in formation behind her, silent as shadows, loyal as ever. The legacy of Officer Thomas Carter lived on in the girl who carried his courage, in the dogs who never stopped protecting her, and in the husky whose love had guided them all home. Because heroes never truly die. They just wait until they are needed again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories about love, loyalty, and courage. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel,